direct stimulation. And these are just facts that I think that unless you're in the loop or unless you have girlfriends or people who talk to you about all of this, people just don't really know. And then they wonder why their sex lives, really become very lackluster. And I treated women in Sarasota. I have a practice still, and we have a house in Sarasota and here in New York, in their 80s, who were incredibly sexually active. And I was not treating them for sexual dysfunction. They had partners, they had regular partners, and it was wonderful. I learned a lot from these women, because the myth is that somebody is over 60 or 70 or 80 and all of a sudden there's no sex drive, and that's not true. So these women, they really taught me a lot about that. As we then go on in our assessment for people who are thinking about marrying for the second and third time, there are a lot of things that you have to think about. I'm all for prenuptial agreements, by the way, especially if people are bringing in some money. You just can't be naive about it. There are a lot of people. I have some women, and I'm almost embarrassed to say it, that I'm treating, and they say that unless the man has several $1 million, they don't even want to go out with him. Now the man better know this, so that he's going to have a prenup, so in case this woman decides to marry him and then check out after she thinks she's going to get half of his money. So we have to be very careful. We have to look at things like alimony and children and being a step parent and how the families are going to mesh. And because people have been married or have had multiple relationships, as I said, doesn't mean that they're going to, know anything more or better about relationships than people who've only been in few or one marriage or serious relationship. So in second marriages, there's a lot that has to go into practical things as well that we would rather not think about. And with a divorce rate of 60% for second marriages and 70% for third, and in second marriages, especially when there are young children, that's one of the primary reasons why second marriages fail, is because of the kids. And so again, to note, and with great communication and problem-solving skills, all of these issues can be resolved. It's just that they really have to be put on the table, and they have to be discussed with your partner and see how it plays out. Then there's another area. The chapter is What's Your Deal? Let's Make a Deal. And again, talking about practical things like children and religion and money and politics and lifestyle. If I want to live in Tahiti and my husband wants to live in New York City, we're probably going to have a problem. Although I'll tell you something really interesting that I read in the marriage section of the New York Times last week. I showed you this, Jim. That a couple got married and they were older. They were probably in their 60s or 70s. He lived in Sweden. She lived in New York City, and the last line said that they would see each other whenever they could when work permitted. So I said to Jim, I don't understand. Why in the world would these people want to marry? Have a relationship, meet in Vienna or someplace like that. But all right, so everybody has their own deal. Maybe the deal is going to work for them. So we can't be so judgmental, although it was very peculiar when I read this. But, these are different kinds of areas and issues that have to be talked about with your partner. And I saw a patient of mine in Sarasota last week, and she married, and she was very financially in a very good place, and she married a very wealthy man who had, he has 3 sons. And there was no prenup, and the only thing that he was going to leave her, because he's about 15 years older than she is, was the house. So when he died, because we were talking about this, was she would have the house, she would have no access to his checking or savings account. And she said to me, I don't even think I'd be able to pay for his funeral. So she didn't call me back because I said to her, I said, Carol, I really want to hear what's going to happen when you go home tonight and have this discussion.
You said that she's of means, financial means, I assume that's what you were saying.
Yes.
So where's the problem?
All right, she has property. So let's say so let's say she needed some dollars today, how quickly, let's say, would she be able to sell her houses and her property? It wouldn't be maybe so quickly. So I suggested to her that they have a talk, and that, I mean, she needs to be on a checking account. I mean, there needs to be something, because she was feeling insecure, and she's a wonderful woman, and yes, she would be able to sell her houses. But if something happened to him today, she'd be in trouble.
Does she have access to her own money?
Apparently, not that much. The money that she has was all invested and all in real estate. That you're right. That is her choice. And you know something? That's a really good point. That perhaps for her to have some peace of mind, and I didn't think about it, and you're right. Maybe she needs to sell a house and have a little extra. You know what?
She took care of herself before she met the
Yes.
family. Why can't she
Yes.
do it after he's gone?
Yeah.
She's older now.
She is older. She is older.
Then he,
No, he's much older than she is. Yes.
all the more reason.
But you're right that since she does have money tied up in investments in real estate, she actually could put aside. You're right.
I've lived all this, so that's
Yes.
why I'm easy to say it.
Yes. No, I think that is, and when I was sitting with her, I didn't think about that, and you're absolutely correct, and that is exactly what I'm going to tell her. I'm going to say I was talking to somebody, and that is an option, because if she has $1 million in property, she ought to be able to sell a house and have $250,000 or something in a bank account.
Yes, it has.
Fair enough. Good point. Good point. And I will convey that to you. Right. Okay, and then the last area is you go through all of this, and in my book, at the end of every chapter, there's questions, and I tell people to fill everything out and look at everything in your own writing. Then comes the real test. And you ask yourself basically 3 questions. 1, what do I want and need in a long-term relationship? Okay, and you write it all down. Number 2, what do I don't want and need in a long-term relationship? And number 3, describe my relationship. Okay, you go through it. And very frequently, what people find out is what they want and need really and truly is not what they have in their current relationship. So then what to do? All right, you're not going to necessarily throw the person away, but then what you do need to do is to be able to sit down with your partner and start to do some serious communication and problem solving. And see where it takes you. If you're upset about money, and I'm upset about communication, and somebody is upset about sex, we have a lot to talk about. So we haven't talked about it before. We haven't reached any resolutions before. But now we're down to the crunch. And I can't live in a situation where you're not talking to me or where you're verbally abusive or whatever. And remember that there's certain things that are absolutely not compromisable. Chemistry and sex. For the majority of people, unless they're saying we don't care anymore, and most people could never honestly really say that. As I've said to people over the years, I can teach people almost anything, but I can't teach chemistry. I cannot teach that chemistry, that elusive feeling that is either there or not there. Another thing that's not compromisable, in my opinion, is emotional communication and problem solving. That is something that is just something that if you can't work it out, you're really going to ask for big time problems. And of course, abuse of any kind, whether we're talking about verbal or emotional or physical or sexual, even if it happens once or only twice a year. I mean, these are things, and any other behaviors that make you feel uncomfortable. So as you go through this, there's lots to talk about. Well, you have to do a lot of talking to yourself and see, and you have to be really honest with yourself. And we like to fool ourselves a lot about a lot of things because things are, this is tough. It's not like we can just, flip on a switch and everything is going to be okay. So we have to really first get really honest with ourselves. Then we have to get really honest with our partners. And then the fun, and then maybe not so much fun, the dialogue really needs to begin. My feeling is, if all of this works out, it's great. And if all of this doesn't work out, it's great. It's a win-win situation either way, because the last thing you want to do is go into a relationship, whether it's a third or fourth marriage or any sort of a relationship, where you're beginning something where there are so many areas and so many things that are missing. So if it works, it's good, and if it doesn't work, if you come to the decision, what I want and need is really not here, and we are not able to successfully negotiate and compromise and trade off and come to a win-win resolution about the things that are really important to me. And that's why we all have to be really independent. And I think I've taught my daughter, and I like to teach people that the relationship needs to be the icing on the cake. We need to be the cake. We need to be really okay. We really need to be tasty. And then if we are lucky enough to find a fabulous, wonderful relationship, I mean, there's nothing like it, of course. But it's about really doing the work and doing our homework and being honest with ourselves. So that's my discovery. And I would love to hear your feedback, what you think about this, any questions, comments, critique.
Quick question, if I may.
Yes.
How does alcohol and drugs fit into your theories?
It's a problem if people are drinking and drugging to excess, it's a problem.
What? Not necessarily excess, but it is a problem with people in general. There are people that can have 2 glasses of wine and become an entirely different individual than the one that you want to be with.
I don't want to be with someone like that, do you?
Why? That has 2 glasses of wine? Of course.
That becomes an entirely different person.
Not.
Right.
So how do you keep that person from having the 2 glasses of wine? I mean, I was in AA for years.
Okay.
So that's not the answer.
The answer is that when I notice that you have 2 glasses of wine,
I'm in trouble.
you become an entirely different person,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't handle that.
Exactly right.
I can't handle that. Now, I don't know what you're going to be like if you have 1 glass of wine. I mean, maybe we could try that and see what happens.
So the point is, the person that's having the 2 glasses of wine will not acknowledge the fact that they are a different individual under the influence of 2 glasses of wine.
But you do notice that, and I don't want to be with you because when you have 2 glasses of wine, you become a different person that I don't want to be with. So it's not about waiting for the other person necessarily to acknowledge, yes, I have a problem and I'm going to do something. It's about our taking responsibility for our needs and saying, this doesn't work for me. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense.
Okay, good. I love your comments, I really do. Okay.
What do you think about a man that visits his mother daily?
What do you think about a man that visits his mother daily?
I'm waiting for him to come home, and the first stop is to his mother's. And sometimes you can live with it, and sometimes you're furious.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, if you, let's say you have a date to have dinner or to go someplace at 6 o'clock, all right? I'm trying creative here, okay? Because I always like
60% for second marriages, and for third and more marriages, the statistic goes up, and a lot of people are very surprised to hear that. So it doesn't matter how many relationships we have, if we don't get it right, we can marry and we can have multiple relationships and continue to repeat the same pattern. So the divorce statistic is very, very alarming. Number two, the extramarital statistic rate is also very, very high. And what I was discovering recently in going through the New York Times is that more and more couples over the age of 50 are ending their marriages for a lot of reasons. You know, the kids are leaving and you're starting to really reevaluate, is this a person that I want to be with? So that there is a lot of turmoil. We're seeing a lot of dating abuse. I mean, who would have ever thought that kids, you know, who are dating are involved in abusive relationships, and those statistics are all also very, very high, and it's very alarming. So family life, as we once knew it, which is not to say that the Leave It to Beaver way of life is the perfect way of life. I mean, that was television. Is really in danger. I mean, there's so many things going on, and I think that people are really running around in circles and are very, very lost when it comes to relationships. So the questions are, why is this the case? Okay, and I have identified 4 reasons, all right? Number one, if we as individuals are not in a good place emotionally and psychologically and psychiatrically, we cannot have a healthy relationship with anybody. We have to be good. So that if we're waiting for the prince on the horse or the princess, you know, to arrive and make everything better for us without our dealing with our own issues, we're going to be sorely, sorely disappointed. So we've got to be good. So it means dealing, whether it's with depression or early child sexual abuse or anxiety or whatever the problems are, we need to deal with us first. Number two, okay, what I discovered is this, is that rich, poor, black, white, Jewish, not Jewish, religious, not religious, Ivy League trained, not Ivy League trained, the majority of people have simply not learned what ingredients go into a healthy, successful, long-term relationship. I mean, where do we learn it? If we weren't fortunate enough to learn it in growing up in our own families, we're really left to our own devices. And look at what we see on television. I mean, I say this to my husband all the time. You look at these sitcoms. I mean, look at the garbage. And this is what the kids are learning about. They're learning about, you know, major, major dysfunction. I mean, I can't think of one television show, maybe you can, where there's actually a functional relationship that's going on with a couple. So we're not getting it. We're not getting it in the media. In fact, in the media, we're getting a lot of very, very distorted views on what healthy relationships are. So if we're not okay, we can't have a healthy relationship. If we don't know what ingredients go into a healthy relationship, number 3, which is what this is about, we are in no position whatsoever to be able to assess who's right for you and who's wrong for you. How can you do an assessment if you don't even know what health is, what healthy relationships are like? And number 4, the majority of people are really very much lacking in emotional communication and problem-solving skills. Okay, right?
Mhm.
Right. So, I mean, what do we do about this? Is really the question. And for me, it's all about, you know, are people willing? Are they first of all willing to acknowledge that these are issues that they have to learn something about? And then number 2, are they really willing to do the work? And that's what I ask people all the time. Are you really serious about doing the work if you're going to come into therapy with me, to acknowledge and address and resolve, not just acknowledge and address, I have a problem and I have to lose weight or we have an issue and someday we're going to take care of it. Are we really going to acknowledge, address, and
come to a real resolution with, with whatever the issues really are. My husband, who is a sociologist and criminologist and an activist, would probably say, right, that if you remove the barriers of racism and poverty and sexism, that somehow that is going to translate into people having healthy relationships. And obviously, if people are having to deal with those issues, it puts enormous strains on their lives and on their relationships. But I'll tell you an interesting story. I'm Canadian, of course, dual citizenship, American as well. And I did my graduate and postgraduate work at McGill. And after I finished my training, I started off in the inner city areas of Montreal, working in the schools as a school social worker, and then I ended up running the school social services program with a couple of other women for the entire province of Quebec. But I started off in the inner city world. Now, in the last 35 years, my clientele in my private practice have been primarily, sort of the rich and the famous and the very well educated. And my surprise was as I was going through my career, to see that there were absolutely no differences whatsoever in terms of relationship knowledge and relationship skill and relationship success if one compares the first group, who were waiting on a monthly basis for the welfare checks to come in so that they could have sufficient food, on the table for their kids, and this group who are flying about and shopping and buying jewelry. And again, it boils down to the fact that they do not know the ingredients, they don't know the communication and problem-solving aspects that are so important in their relationships. So it was not about saying it was just poverty, or it was racism, or it was sexism. It was about a learning curve that neither group, that none of us, for the most part, have been fortunate enough to be able to have. But there's good news, okay, and I really want to tell you about what I have discovered, and that really does work. I'm sitting in my office in Providence, Rhode Island, in 1997, and it was a Friday afternoon, and my daughter Jordana was at camp, and I was just sitting there, and I was saying, I had really nothing to do, it was kind of like all dressed up, no place to go, and my clientele from Brown University, my office was just down the street from Brown, and all these lovely people who were educated and smart and really terrific people. And I asked myself, what happened that day? And that day I realized that unless people learned, finally, how to assess who was right for them, who was wrong for them, they were going to go from relationship to relationship, maybe marry a blonde or a brunette or somebody that was a redhead, but the dynamics would probably continue because they hadn't really gotten to the root of the issues. And I realized at that point that I needed to write a book. And I wrote the book for my daughter. This is my second marriage, and I wanted her to have a guide that would help her make good decisions and be able to make good assessments when she was dating. So the book originally came out in '98, and it came out in the third edition a couple of years ago, and this is what it's about. Okay. First of all, we have to realize and acknowledge that we do need to assess our partners. I mean, we are so busily, we are researching cars and grams of fat and yogurt and cell phones, and we're busy looking at consumer reports about what's best in this area and what's best in that area. So it's a mindset. And I never thought about this, when I was starting out dating. I never thought about assessing or evaluating. I mean, that word, it would never come into my mind or into my vocabulary. But it needs to. It really needs to, because we need to know who our partner is and who our partner isn't, and it isn't going to happen in 3 minutes. And aside, I had quite a famous matchmaker, and I probably shouldn't mention her name, on my radio show a couple of months ago, and she said she could make assessments in 3 minutes. Now, it's like, you've got to be kidding. I mean, I did research with 450 people wanting to see, you know, how this process was going to play out, and it takes close to a year to really discover who your partner is and isn't, using the different areas that, you know, I have written about. So where do we begin? Okay, we begin with family background. Your partner's family background. Of course, we also have to look at our own family backgrounds and what we're bringing into our relationships. But in this assessment process, we're looking at our partner's family background. What did my partner learn about relationships from, you know, being a part of the family and not even being aware of, but, you know, looking at the dynamics of mom and dad, because the acorn does not fall far from the tree. And what we see from one generation, we see alcoholism from one generation to another, we see depression from one generation to another, we see abuse of various different kinds from one generation to another. So because your partner may have come from, you know, a very dysfunctional background, you're not going to throw the person away automatically. But what you're going to want to know is, what has this person learned? And has my partner, who I think I'm madly in love with, has he or she been willing to address the issues? And I'll give you a personal example, okay? I had a mom who loved me very much, and I'm an only child, who was extremely critical, okay? Everybody else did it better, okay? Everybody was a better student, everybody treated their moms better. And when I became pregnant with Jordana, when she arrived, I was so conscious, so conscious of making sure that I would never do the same thing that my mom did. And I probably went overboard, you know, in another direction. But it was a conscious decision. I was aware of what did not work. I was aware of my father, on the other hand, who was empathic and sensitive and loving, and he would try to explain to me that my mom didn't really mean it. But in fact, it was something that I suppose, had I not been aware of, I unconsciously, easily may have repeated those patterns, which I absolutely did not want to do. So it's about being aware of the things from our family of origin that worked, and things from our family of origin that did not work, and that we do not want to repeat, and that we better do something about if we find ourselves going in that direction. So family of origin from the left. There are 2 chapters in the book that deal with what I call skeletons in the closet. Now, as a psychotherapist, I've learned to really, you know, I would like to think, never miss a trick. I'm always asking questions, I'm always looking. But for people who are not trained, there are a lot of things that are very easy to miss. If you end up with somebody who is clinically depressed, or who has a bipolar disorder, or any other, you know, serious psychiatric problem, who's not willing to deal with it. I mean, there are plenty of depressed people who are doing what they need to do. They're in therapy. If they need on occasion to take medication, they take medication, but they're dealing with their issues. So you need to be very aware of, you know, is this somebody, you know, I had a situation where a man was dating a woman, and after every dinner, she would excuse herself and go to the ladies' room. Well, what was that about? Well, it turns out she was bulimic. And she was in denial about being bulimic, and he would have had a heck of a time being with somebody who was bulimic, who had problems with self-image and self-confidence. So she was not willing to deal, and fortunately, he was really aware that this kind of a problem could escalate and would really impact their relationship. As for clinical depression, as for alcoholism, people will say, well, you know, he only or she only gets drunk on weekends. Well, that's a problem, everybody. That is a problem if the person only gets drunk on weekends. And we can put our head in he's loving and he really seems to care. How do you think Monique felt about this man? What do you think?
She didn't like him.
She didn't like him. Why didn't she like him? She wasn't used to him. She wasn't used to him. Exactly.
She trusted.
She didn't, because she wasn't used to anybody being good to her, so it felt weird.
Suspicious.
It was suspicious. It just wasn't, it just didn't feel right. So we had a lot of work to do because she had never experienced a healthy relationship. And as it turned out, she ended up with a woman, and she did end up in a stable relationship, but it took a lot of time for her to work through what was familiar was not something that was good. And I remember she said to me, gosh, and this is 25 years ago, and I can still hear her saying, Beatty, how can something so bad feel so right? And how can something so right feel just wrong and just not right? So again, she had work to do, and hopefully is continuing to do it and is in a good relationship. But we have to be very, very savvy about what it is that's in front of us, and that we're not going to be making excuses for people's bad behavior. I mean, nobody is perfect, but if you start to see a pattern, you cannot sit there and say, oh, well, it's just a bad day. We then get into the whole area of emotional communication. Now, communication is really easy when we talk about, are we going to go to the Hamptons today? Are we going to go to the film festival? And where are we going to go for dinner? I mean, that's really easy. But it's when we get into sticky situations. How are we then going to communicate our pain, our fear, our disappointment, jealousies, upset, hurt, pain? You want a partner, and we also need to be in a place where we're able to say it, and say it well. I'm really upset the way you talk to me, or I'm feeling confused, or I'm feeling disappointed, and you need to have a partner who is willing to sit down with you and discuss and make compromises and make trade-offs and come to a win-win resolution. It's not about denying and avoiding and blaming and working 25 hours a day and being passive-aggressive and just doing a disappearing act when things get tough. And none of us like conflict. And nobody likes to bring up things that are sort of dicey and sticky. But that's what real life healthy relationships require. And then I get into the whole area of problem solving. And people will do anything and everything to avoid dealing with differences and with problems. It's not comfortable. It's just simply not a comfortable thing to do. And yet, if we don't do it, nothing ever changes. Nothing ever is resolved. And I'm constantly, encouraging people to learn how to say it well. I mean, we make appointments for everything in our life, okay? We need to make appointments to talk with our partners and say, look, honey, I have something that I really need to talk to you about. And if you have a partner who says, I don't want to talk about it, and you're overreacting, and you have PMS, or you're going through menopause, or you're whatever, you are not going to be able to have a long-term successful relationship with somebody like that at all. And I would say that most of the time that I spend, I do a lot of work with couples, is teaching people how to go from A to B to C to D in terms of their emotional communication and problem-solving skills, which are almost completely lacking. And yet, people say to me, what are the really two huge important ingredients that make or break a relationship? It is problem solving and communication. I mean, it really, really is. So then we get to another area, which is intimacy. And some people will say to me, I have a very intimate relationship, and I'll say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean you have great sex? or do you have an emotionally intimate relationship? Now, it's great to have great sex, and it's great to have an emotionally intimate relationship, and ideally we want to have it both, but we need to be clear that there is a difference between emotional intimacy and sex. So emotional intimacy, you want to be with someone where there's caring and sharing and love and respect and commitment, and where you see that play out, not over 3 minutes, as this matchmaker told me on the radio show, but you see it playing out over a period of time, and where there is consistency with that. And that's what emotional intimacy really is. Are any of us perfect? No. Is it ever going to be 100%? No. But that's the kind of a person you want to be with. You want to be with someone who is emotionally available, who's emotionally really, really there for you and you for them. Otherwise, what are we doing? I mean, we might as well be with ourselves. We then get into the other area of sex. And one of the things that I've certainly realized in my own life, and as a practitioner, the importance of sex and passion. Now, how do you think that we are doing in the United States, looking at Harvard studies and other studies that I'm going to tell you about, how are we doing sexually in our very permissive society in the United States today? What do you think? How are we doing? How are we doing sexually? How are we as an American group doing sexually? Do you think we're doing well? No. Do you think we're doing well?
No.
What do you think?
I think better than, say, the 50s.
Yeah. What do you think, Jim? Do you think that as a society that we're doing well?
It depends on what questions you're asking in terms of number of partners or sexual satisfaction is measured by whatever. You were talking about the differences in sexual socialization from the 50s and the 60s. Certainly a tremendous difference there with more experimentation. But I think what you're saying is we're not doing a very good job in combining the passion and the love and the emotionality and the need to be caring and intimate.
Well, that is absolutely true, but I want to cite you some very maybe surprising statistics. Okay, there was a big study done at Western Pittsburgh Psychiatric Hospital with 100 happy and 100 very happily married people. These were not people in therapy, they were not in sex therapy, they were in a study, and a very good bona fide study. Now, listen to the results of this study. 50% of the women had difficulty becoming aroused. 25% of the women had difficulty achieving orgasm. 15% of the women were unable to achieve orgasm under any circumstances at all. Okay. With the men, a third of the men had problems with premature ejaculation. 52% of the men had difficulty with erectile dysfunction. So if this is what's going on in the bedrooms of happy and very happily married, and there was a mixed age group, okay, what is going on in the bedrooms of the rest of us, all right? And what I'm seeing is that I see couples in their 30s and 40s who rarely have sex. I see couples in their 70s and 80s who are very sexually active and who are really having to think more about STDs because it's rampant in that age group. So it's interesting, and there are many, many reasons why people are having problems in the bedroom, and it goes back to, if we're not in a good place emotionally and psychologically and psychiatrically, it's going to be very difficult if you're suffering from clinical depression and other psychiatric problems to be able to just let go and enjoy sex. The other thing is that there are people who are still carrying a lot of baggage from their childhoods about what good girls do and what people should be doing and shouldn't be doing. So there are religious beliefs, there's early child upbringing kinds of beliefs, of course there's early child sexual abuse, and with that, everybody needs therapy to work it through, and it can be worked through beautifully. Then we're looking at things like prescription medication. People don't realize the sexual side effects of prescription medication. Every single antidepressant, every single pill that we are taking for a variety of different conditions have sexual side effects. The doctors, they don't really say it because most of the physicians aren't comfortable talking about sex in any case, including the urologists. So people are taking a lot of medication and they're wondering about, why is it that I don't have much of a sex drive or I don't have much libido? Obviously, people who are going through physical problems and they're needing to take certain kinds of medications, I mean, it is what it is, and sometimes it just, it can't be helped. And then there's the whole hormone thing. I had a man in my office last week. He's 45 years old, and he was many problems, but we were talking about his mood and his sex drive, because I'm also a sex therapist. And he says he can barely get out of bed in the morning, and he has virtually no sex drive. And I asked him about his testosterone level. And he says, oh, no, it's good. I said, listen, it may be good, but I want you to let me know what the number is. So he comes back, and his testosterone level was 60. Now, that man has no testosterone, 60. The average range of testosterone, the lowish is around 350, and it goes up to 1,000 for younger men. So here's a guy who's in his 40s, who has 60 testosterone levels, and no wonder why he has no sex drive and is barely able to get out of bed and is going to lose his corporate job if he doesn't do something about it. And it was a really good thing that we were able to discover that. So the man and testosterone thing is very important, as is the women and testosterone. I don't know about you, but I never thought about having my hormone levels done until about, 15 or 20 years ago. Have you ever had your hormone levels? So
Yes, I have.
Okay. So your doctor and you're on the ball. You asked. He or she didn't ask.
I was doing my physical, and I specifically asked because you know yourself when you're out of sync.
Absolutely. And I mean, our estrogen levels need to be, there's a certain range where they need to be, and as women are going through menopause, our estrogen levels are much lower. As our testosterone levels, women also have testosterone, and we also have progesterone, and we need to know, and if our doctors, aren't savvy enough to be asking us about, our sex drive and our mood and our lethargy and our energy level and our concentration, I really recommend that we all have our levels done. And one has to be very careful with hormone therapy, and there are a lot of problems with the Premarin and the Primavera and that whole era. But the fact of the matter is that very